Mobility. You've talked a lot about it. It's the really theme of this auto show. How's it going to change our lives?
Well, it's going to change our lives in a lot of ways. And I think if we do it thoughtfully and do it well, it'll do a number of things. It'll reduce congestion in cities, which has to happen around the world. It'll give people access to health care that currently can't get to doctors. It'll, importantly, hopefully get people out of poverty because we'll be able to get people to where the work is. Today, they often can't get there. So if this is done well, if it's done thoughtfully, it can really be an enormous benefit to society. Not to mention the fact we won't have drunk driving anymore. Elderly people won't have to give up their driver's licenses. So there'll be lots of benefits if we do this well and we do it thoughtfully.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned poorer people
Yes.
because I think many people think that this will really hit the rich first, that they'll take advantage of it and the poor will get excluded.
Well, but so Brookings and Harvard have both done studies that show that increasingly people are living where the work is not, the people that are in poverty, and they can't get to work. But if we had autonomous shuttles that could pick people up and take them to the work that's a great way to get people, back to the workforce and out of poverty. So, and that's something we're very focused on at Ford.
What about urban versus rural? Will we see this as a practical in urban centers first?
I will see it first in urban centers because I think the problem is more acute there. You've got great congestion in urban centers all around the world, not just the U.S. The whole notion of rural mobility takes on a kind of a different definition. So there are about 800 million people around the world that don't have access to health care that live in rural areas. So we've got experiments, Ford does. For instance, we're working with NGOs in Africa where we're delivering health care to villages, but while the vehicle's doing it, it's actually mapping the routes. So instead of visiting one village a day, they can now visit 2 or 3. So that definition of mobility is very different than solving urban congestion. And in time, both will come to pass. But there's no question that initially the lion's share of the emphasis is on cities.
What does it do to jobs? Because it all sounds much more efficient than what we have now. And efficiency is good, but often that translates into fewer jobs.
Well, honestly, we don't know. It could. So if you think about getting people out of poverty to where work is, that creates more jobs. On the other hand, you're going to have some job loss with things like truck drivers and taxi drivers and Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. So it'll be evolving, but there'll be lots of different support jobs created for all of this too. So I've seen lots of projections, on both sides of the ledger. Is this a big job creator? Is this a job detractor? I think the answer is we won't know yet.
What's the timeline? Because we've heard a lot from the auto industry, it's really coming and coming.
Right.
Increasingly, Wall Street seems to believe that. They believe the aggressive projections.
Well, I don't know. Aggressive is, and I think it makes sense to be cautious here. There's a lot of hype and a lot of PR out there now and a lot of bold statements. And there's no question the technology's developing quickly. But we need to introduce it thoughtfully in a way that people actually feel like we're making their lives better and that they trust the technology. And the worst thing that can happen is to rush this out prematurely, have some early incidents, and set back the whole adoption. So, and then there's the whole soft side, if you will, the ethics of this, and all the regulations that are going to have to go in, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And so it's really hard to put so I guess my answer is the technology will be there perhaps before all these other issues are answered.
We'll talk about the ethics and the regulation for a second, because right now human beings make
Yes,
moral judgments, even when they're driving.
Well,
what happens when an algorithm's doing
Well,
that?
that's right. And excuse me, but often you and I don't have the ability to react quickly enough to make those judgments. We just react if we see an incident. But the vehicles will have such incredible computing power, it'll be so quick that they will be able to make decisions that you and I can only react to. And so those will have to be programmed in a way that's thought out, and those discussions are yet to happen.
So your family has been very patient with Ford, even as the stock price hasn't done so well. This is a big investment. We just heard $11 billion in electric vehicles.
Oh, I think it's fantastic.
So, but what's the timeline? At what point do you have to start finding some real
Well, it's already
returns?
happening. Well, it's already happening. So a lot of this technology is going into vehicles today. Connected vehicles are starting to happen. Vehicles talking to other vehicles, vehicles talking to the infrastructure. All these driver's assist technologies that we've been talking about are starting to happen. So a lot of the pieces of autonomy are going in even as we're sitting here. and they're all about making vehicles safer and more pleasurable to be in. So, we're not going to just wake up one day and it'll all, we'll hit a switch. It'll be very incremental. But look, we think the payback on this is going to be tremendous when we get here. I think it'll change our business model in a way that we think is going to be really amazing.
Even if it means you sell fewer vehicles, because the efficiency will limit the number of vehicles required.
Well, the profit per vehicle, and we think can be really, really quite remarkable in this. The uptime will be higher. They'll have to be replaced, I think, perhaps at a cadence that may be quicker than current vehicles. So, I've seen, and we have our own projections on sales, and they're all over the map. We won't know till we get there.
So what about our emotional connection with the car? I mean, your family, more than any other family I can think of, is associated with this.
Right.
It is the darling of Americans. We all remember our first car. Is that all going to go away?
No, it won't all go away because, first of all, we won't have all AVs. AVs will have their place for sure, but I think as long as you and I are around, the fun of owning a vehicle will still be there, but we may not want to drive it every day. So if you live in an urban area, you might prefer, and you probably will prefer, to have a vehicle, seamlessly take you to where you want to go. But even that vehicle, we're focused on how do we personalize that so that when you get in that AV, it is uniquely your AV. And you have an experience that you think, wow, that was really unexpected and very cool.
Will a child born today in 2018 have to learn to drive in 2034?
It's a really interesting question. They may not have to, no, but they may want to. And there is a joy in driving. I feel it. I love to drive, and I'll always love to drive. But not everybody does agree with that.
So finally, NAFTA. We have to talk about NAFTA.
Yes.
We have a big negotiation coming up later this month.
Right.
You've talked to the president, at least in the past. Have you talked to the president to give a sense of where we are with NAFTA?
No, I haven't.
Do you have a sense whether there's a real danger that we would pull out of NAFTA, as the Canadian government purportedly is preparing for?
I think to do something that drastic would not be something we'd support. I mean, NAFTA could be modernized. We could get some currency certainty into NAFTA. But NAFTA has been in place for a while and it's served this industry well.
How badly would it hurt Ford Motor Company?
Well, I mean, I think the whole industry. I mean, it's our industry was really built around NAFTA, and so it depends what you mean too. I mean, there's a continuum here. There's a complete blow up, and then there's a modernization, something that we would not be opposed to. But again, this whole industry was really built around the notion of NAFTA, and I think we have to be very careful with how much we tinker with it.
Finally, going back to electric vehicles for a moment.
Yes.
What's going to happen to the oil industry? What's going to happen to cobalt? What's going to happen to lithium? What are the other effects on other industries of this big a transformation?
Well, I mean, clearly there are going to be effects. Far be it for me to speak for another industry, but we've seen shifts in our industry over 100. We've been in business 114 years. There have been tremendous shifts over those years, and my greatest hope is, and my greatest focus is making sure that Ford is at the forefront of all that, so around another 114 years.